The Battle of Stalingrad is widely considered by historians as being the bloodiest battle fought during the Second World War. This historic battle ensued between the Soviet forces and the Nazi Germany forces, and saw a record high 2 million casualties, including civilians. In today's video on Warzone, we've detailed all of the intriguing facts about the deadliest battle that was fought during the Second World War. The findings we've unraveled in this video would leave you awestruck. And as always, make sure to give this video a like, hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell for more mind-blowing war content like this one. Do well to leave us a comment as well, as we'd love to read your opinions on this historic battle. Now, let's dive in. The Battle of Stalingrad holds major significance in the history of the Second World War, as it played a crucial role in changing the tide of the war in favor of the Allied forces. By the third year into World War II, Hitler decided to invade southern Russia with all-powerful Nazi troops. This was in the summer of the year 1942. The German forces had just captured territories in modern-day Ukraine and Belarus, and an assault on Soviet territory was now increasingly inevitable. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, who was himself very ruthless, had largely succeeded in repelling all attempts by German forces to invade Soviet territories in the West during the winter of 1941. Hitler had planned for Nazi troops to occupy the city of Moscow, but this plan would fall through, and although Stalin's Red Army was able to repel the Germans, they suffered severe casualties from the battle. Stalin remained suspicious of another impending invasion, and he wasn't wrong. But while efforts and resources were directed towards protecting the capital city, Hitler had other plans, especially after the resounding defeat that Stalin's Red Army had inflicted on Nazi troops. So Hitler set his eyes on another city. This time it was the historic city of Stalingrad. Hitler chose to attack Stalingrad for a strategic reason. He wanted to cripple the Soviet army, and Stalingrad was the primary industrial center for the Soviets. The city produced goods and artillery that were crucial to Soviet war efforts, making it just the perfect target for Hitler. The Führer originally planned to take control of Stalingrad because he recognized the city's value for propaganda. You see, the city was named after Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviets at the time, and Hitler knew if he could successfully take down the city, this would demoralize the Soviets' army and automatically motivate Nazi troops. For this reason, similarly, the Soviet army felt the ultimate need to also protect the city at all cost. Before Hitler launched his attack on Stalingrad, he proclaimed that upon taking the city, he would kill all the city's male residents and deport its women. The stage had already been set for a bloodbath, and Stalin ordered all Russians strong enough to hold a rifle to take up arms in defense of the city. On the 23rd of August 1942, the Nazi army would officially launch its attack on Stalingrad, but the Soviet forces were able to hold them off just north of Stalingrad. The Soviets suffered severe casualties on the first day of the attacks and lost over 200,000 men. They now clearly understood Hitler's deadly intent, so before the next round of German assault, they shipped out the bulk of the stores of grain and cattle out of Stalingrad. Meanwhile, there were over 400,000 residents yet to be evacuated. Stalin believed that the presence of the residents in the city would motivate Soviet soldiers to fight the enemy twice as hard. The German forces were relentless, and within a few days, the German Air Force succeeded in bombarding the Volga River, rendering it impassable for ships, and sank several Russian commercial vessels in the process. For the following months, the German Air Force launched dozens of airstrikes, bombarding the city to ruins. Many historians have been unable to estimate the exact number of civilian casualties, although it is widely believed that thousands of civilians were killed and thousands more were captured by the Germans and forced into labor in camps located in Germany. By September, the German Air Force already had full control of the city skies, and this made Soviet soldiers desperate. Women were enlisted to dig trenches, and workers were not involved in war-related jobs were asked to take up arms. The situation with the Soviet army was becoming dire by the day, and they suffered heavy losses from sustained shelling by the Nazis. But despite these heavy casualties, Stalin ordered his forces not to retreat, issuing the famous "not a step back" decree. In this decree, Stalin stated that those who dared or tried to surrender would be subject to a trial by military tribunal and face execution. Stalingrad was on the brink of being defeated, with fewer than 20,000 troops and less than 100 tanks to withstand the German air and ground attacks. Fortunately for the Soviet army, Stalin decided to send reinforcements to the city and surrounding areas. The fight intensified as both sides clashed. A Soviet counterattack famously known as Operation Uranus was orchestrated by Soviet generals. The plan involved moving Russian troops to the west and north of Stalingrad. And although the Soviets sustained heavy losses, they were able to form a defensive ring around the city by November, trapping almost 300,000 German soldiers. Stalin's Red Army automatically created a blockade that limited access to supplies, and German forces trapped within the city slowly starved. As the battle progressed, winter began in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet army knew the German troops would be highly disadvantaged by the harsh weather conditions. So, they mobilized their forces to surround the Nazi troops, pushing and driving them into an even tighter corner. The Germans were stretched thin, and eventually the Soviet troops began to break the lines of the German troops to the west of the city. Casualties were on the rise, and German generals soon realized that they could no longer take the city. With how tight the situation had become, Nazi troops were further pushed into tinier and harsher regions, with the hope of hastening their surrender. But even as the Germans died of starvation and ran out of fuel and ammunition, Hitler refused to surrender. By January 1943, the Soviets had taken back full control of Stalingrad, and over 100,000 German soldiers were now in captivity, many of whom had died due to cold and starvation. Germany's defeat at Stalingrad turned out to be the first German defeat acknowledged by Hitler during the Second World War, and this incident automatically turned the tides of war in favor of the Allied forces. This defeat dealt a great blow to the Führer. Hitler immediately made changes to Nazi tactics and switched from an offensive to a defensive approach towards the war. The Soviet forces, on the other hand, became highly motivated. This victory over Hitler greatly boosted the confidence of Soviet soldiers, especially as the war continued. In Volgograd, modern-day Stalingrad, people gather every year to celebrate and commemorate the Soviet victory at the historic battle that greatly damaged their city.